about 4 of us here, and about at 8:50, I think there were about 4 of us here. So I'm really shocked anybody came. So I'm glad you're here this morning. Whenever I was here, one thing that I was known for, the people didn't really care about the content of my sermons. What was important was that they were really short. But today I've got a lot to say because we're going through a lot of information. So I'm going to talk really fast sometimes and try to get you through this material. And today is really how to study the Bible with someone, how to sit down and study with them. This is not the only way. Am I on? Oh. Now I'm in a mountain or in a bucket or something. There we go. This is not the only way to study the Bible with someone. If you already have some kind of lesson or form or method or whatever you want to say that you use, well, keep using that if it works for you. This is just the one that works really well for me. And actually, I didn't even write any of these. Some of you have even heard this information. Back in 1999, we had Rex Boyles come and do a seminar about his studies called Market, and that's the exact study that I use. And probably, I don't know, I've used it with hundreds of people, and it is amazing the high percentage of those people that have been baptized. Maybe 80% of them, maybe even more than that, a huge percentage. And maybe it doesn't work for you. If it doesn't, that's okay. But maybe it does. It's just something to look at. At the same time, I want you to understand that it is just a method. What's the power behind it is God and His Word. So I don't want you to think that we're trying to do some kind of tricks or something unusual. It is God and His Word, and it is presenting His Word to people. Tomorrow I'm going to talk a whole lot about what we do kind of as in a congregation, kind of some big things that we do. But today is very specific in the one-on-one time with people. And so I hope for those of you who are able to be here tomorrow, you'll hear some of that, or if that's what you're looking for, you'll hear it tomorrow, or you can get this great DVD that's being made right now. In this little group of studies that we have, if you have your book with you, you'll see it. And it's called Market, and there are 3 lessons with this. The first one lets us know about Jesus, that Jesus can help. The second one, that Jesus can care. And the third one, that Jesus saves. These studies have some really good points, and they also have a flaw. And let me tell you the flaw right up front, because this is where you would need to do more work. This gets a person to the point of baptism. It doesn't take them past that. So you would need to keep working with people. One of the worst things we can do is share Christ with people and then just let them flounder. So you would need to keep working with people. All this does is get you up to that point. One of the things that I'm realizing, especially in Houston, and maybe because it is now considered the most diverse city in America, even more so than New York City. But one thing that I'm realizing is I don't assume people go to church anywhere anymore. I used to assume they did. Now, I still assume that they have some kind of background with some kind of religious group. But I don't assume that at all because I just don't find people who do. There are large churches there, so I know people do. But it's really hard for me to imagine. These kind of studies that I'm going to talk about are really studies for people who already believe in Jesus and believe in the Bible. Now, if it's somebody who doesn't believe in Jesus, if you're talking about a Muslim or a Buddhist or an atheist, this is not the study to use with them. But most people I generally talk to believe in Jesus at least. Yeah, I believe in Him. Now, whether they accept the authority of Jesus is something else. But at least they believe in Jesus. So as you see these lessons, they're extremely simple. And it is a way to convert more than just people's heads. You know, it's important to convert people's heads. But Jesus also died for their emotions, for their hearts, for their entire beings. This is a way to help people see Jesus and who Jesus is and fall in love with Jesus. Many, many times I've done these studies, and it's just the Scripture being open, that people have wept during the studies because they didn't realize they had such a friend in Jesus, because they don't feel like they have any friends. And so what you do in this study, I'll just take you through the first one. As you notice on the first page, Lesson 1, Jesus Can Help, Mark 1:1. And it says at the end of Mark 1:1, write Mark 4:35, 5 through 43. You can have this piece of paper out when you study with someone. You can do that. But it's easier for me to have it all written in my Bible. And so I just write it in my Bible. On Mark chapter 1, right above, in black ink, every lesson for lesson 1 for me is in black ink. And you say, well, why did you choose black? Well, I'd like to tell you it's because we are in sin, and sin is dark. And it was really because it was the first pen I picked up. So that's why it's in black. And so it says Mark 1:1, and I go back to the second lesson, and it says Jesus Cares, Mark 1:29 through 45, where that lesson starts. And the third one in red, Jesus Saves, Mark 10:45, where that lesson starts. I have a wide margin Bible, so I can write on the side. You may be one that you don't like to write in your Bible. That's okay. Then use the piece of paper or memorize it. Do one or the other. But it helps me just to have it open. And I don't try to trick people and say, hey, I know all this. I'll tell them, hey, I've got some notes inside of my Bible. It helps me out. Because I want to be authentic with people and be real so that I'm not pretending to be something that I'm not. So in Mark 1:1 is where this lesson starts about Jesus, that Jesus helps. And I'll just read the scriptures today just because it's easier with the camera. In Mark 1:1, the beginning of the gospel about Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So the first question is really easy. Do you know what gospel means? Somebody tell me out there, what does gospel mean?
Good news.
Good news. That's easy. So what you're about to read, what we're about to study in this lesson is good news about Jesus. And it doesn't mean that every moment in it was wonderful. But it's all going to be good when we see the whole picture of it all put together, that it's good news. And so at the end of Mark chapter 1, verse 1, I have Mark 4:35. One thing that this lesson does is you stay almost the whole time in Mark. And if you're not in Mark, then you just switch over to Luke and then to John and then to Acts. You are not going to be running all of your Bibles. Because another thing, if you have studies with people, please do this for me. Don't tell them anymore. Turn to John 8:14 or Acts 2:38. Unless you say, the Bible is divided into two different parts, the Old Testament and the New part, and the Old Testament and New Testament, and it's full of books that are in each of them. And inside those books, then, men went in and they put in chapter headings and then verses so we'd be able to quote them. Because what I've found in the last about 18 months is when I say, turn to John 4:12, they'll say, huh? What does that mean? People are completely illiterate, for the most part, about the Bible. And I always start. Now, you may already know this, but if you don't, I just want to say it. Well, if they figure it out the first time, then we just keep moving. And I don't have to go back to that. But for the most part, I find out they don't know the Bible has chapters and books and verses. And so we go to Mark chapter 4, verse 35. In verse 35, we start the story of Jesus calms the storm. Now, I'm going to be going a lot faster and not very interactive with you today because I'm watching the clock back there. If we were in a study, I would be very relaxed with this, and we would take time with each one of these. It says that day, in verse 35, that day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, he rebuked the wind, and he said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. And he said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this, that even the wind and the waves obey?" So I stop here. And I'll talk about some story that I have in my personal life, or some story that I've seen on television about somebody in a storm on the water. And a story I often tell is a story of a time that I went on a fishing trip in Brazil when I was a missionary there. Some people called me, asked me to come down and translate. There were some people I knew from the Texas Panhandle, and they said, we're going to be in Brazil in this city. We've hired a fishing boat, and we want you to be our translator. So I go on a bus, 8 hours to get to this place. And I say, okay, well, where are the fishing poles? Because they asked me to ask the captain of the Brazilian minnow. It's kind of like Gilligan, you know. They asked me, so I say, where are the fishing poles? And the man said, oh, we don't use poles. We just tie a string around our fingers. Oh, that was a lot of fun that day. Up in the waves and back and forth trying to figure out what we had. We did catch fish, strange fish, flying fish. There were things I'd never seen before. Not anything you want to eat. But we're out far from shore. It seemed like about 30 miles, but I imagine it was probably about half a mile. I don't know. But in this little boat, there was the captain and his first mate, and there were 3 of us. And the boat was so small that you could put your foot on one side and your foot on the other side. This is all the wider it was. And at one point, the waves got so big, we would go up in the air, and we were way on top, and then we would go down. And when we'd go down, all we could see around us was water. I felt like Jonah. I knew there would be a big fish jump out of the water at any time. And so we would go down, and in the first mate there said, put a foot on each side. We've got to steady the boat. We've got to steady the boat. I was scared to death. The greatest thing that ever happened to me was the moment that I put my feet back on ground, and I got off that boat. It definitely was a bad day, let me tell you. It was cold and windy. Everything was bad about it. Except I got a good sermon illustration. I was scared. You ever been in a boat and been scared, or been in a storm and been scared, and you know what that's like? Now at that point, the other person will probably tell you a story of what it was like when they were in a boat. You are drawing out emotion. You are coming together just as friends come together. You're communicating with each other about what that was like. And so you look at it and you say, well, when you look back at this text, what could man do with the storm? And they look at it. Well, nothing. They say, well, the weatherman can't even predict one. It doesn't seem like, can he? Incidentally, my wife pointed out it's May 3rd today, isn't it? Well, I'll stop and remember that. And so what can man do with it? Well, he can't do anything. But what could Jesus do? Well, Jesus could stop it. He got up and said, peace, be still, or quiet, be still. And so why is it that the weather obeys him? Why would the weather obey Jesus? So they stop and they think about that question, and you say, if Jesus can do what no man can do, he must be the Son of God. Jesus is pretty important, obviously. And that's good news. Remember we said it was going to be good news? Because if Jesus can calm their fears, he can calm mine. And so we start seeing that the Bible is relevant. Because we all have fears. We all have things we're afraid of, and it's different depending on what the person that you're talking to is dealing with. If they watch cable news all day, they have lots of world fears. They're scared. And you start talking about a Jesus who can calm the storms in my life. And so then you notice at the end of that, it says Mark 5, verses 1 through 20 is what I have written there. Boy, you don't go very far for that one, do you? You just start into the next chapter. Healing of a demon-possessed man. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an evil spirit came from the tombs to meet them. The man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills he would cry out and cut himself with stones. Now, when Jesus saw him from a distance, the man, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Swear to me that you won't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you evil spirit." And then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. So we'll stop there for a minute. I'll do the same thing. I'll say, you ever been in the cemetery at night? Kind of scary, isn't it? I tell them a story. I remember whenever I was a student at Oklahoma Christian, I was a sophomore. We went down to the cemetery there on Memorial Road. And so we go out, and it was dark, and we were walking out in that cemetery. 3 of us were walking with a freshman. We were big sophomores. But we had a freshman, and we were saying, come through the cemetery. You got to do all this with us. Well, one of my other friends, he had gotten down in a grave that had been dug out, and they put plywood over. It was going to be for a burial the next day. We said, look down in there. Well, when he did, our friend jumped up at him. Scared him to death. That poor freshman never finished school because he's still running. So somehow you draw them in. You tell stories. You just share life. And they'll tell you maybe something about a cemetery. And you draw them right back to the text. And you say, what could people do, or man do with Legion? Well, nothing. Look what they tried to do. Well, they bound him up. And he tore the chains that bound him. He tore them. And look how strong he is. Man could do nothing, and the whole village must have been scared to death of this guy. But what could Jesus do? Well, Jesus can make that demon come out of him. Jesus is incredible. And so then you carry it on, and you read the rest of the story starting in verse 11. And a large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside, and the demons begged Jesus, send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them. He gave them permission, and the evil spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and the countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. And the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. And just for time's sake, I'm not going to read the rest. But you say, Jesus took care of this man's problems for him. And then as you would follow along in your Bible, you'd say, who is this that even the demons obey him? Well, it's Jesus. It's the Son of God. And you'd come back and you would say, if Jesus could make his life better, he can resolve the problems in my life. He can resolve my problems. Do you see how they start seeing who Jesus is? I've never had anybody say, well, I think I'm demon-possessed. We've never gone into any kind of conversation like that. What we're doing is talking about the problems in our life, and that Jesus is the answer for those things. Now you notice at the end it says, go to chapter 5, verses 21 through 34. Wow, that's easy, isn't it? Because that's the very next passage. And so you look there and you see Jesus, and it says it's going to be with a dead girl and a sick woman. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue rulers named Jairus came there, seeing Jesus. He fell at his feet and he pleaded earnestly with him. My little daughter's dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors, spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and she touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. How once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him, he turned around in the crowd and he asked, who touched my clothes? You see the people crowding around you. His disciples answered, and yet you can ask who touched me? But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. So once again, I'd share a story here about someone who was suffering. You see this woman, though? What could man do with her suffering? Nothing. Nothing. She has spent every penny she has to try to get help, just like people do in the 21st century with cancer. Think about what it was like in the first century before medicine was. Nothing. And you realize what her plight is in the world. Because she is bleeding, she's not allowed to go to the synagogue or to the temple. So she hasn't worshiped in 12 years. Maybe there was a husband, maybe he's gone. You can imagine what it would be like for her in the marketplace. Excuse me, ma'am, I don't know if you know, but you're bleeding. I don't know what it would have been like for her. She is at the bottom of society. Women in those days, as you know, they weren't even allowed to give testimony in court. They were at the bottom. And now this woman is even farther at the bottom because she's bleeding and she has no money. Now I want you to see somebody else in the story. Now I'm not going to tell you, read all of what happens to the girl for time's sake. But you remember back at the shore, there was Jairus. I don't know how you say Jairus. I usually just kind of have some fun with his name because the people I'm studying with, they don't know how to say it either, so I'll call him Gyro or Euro or whatever. And so you have him, he's a synagogue ruler. He's a man with power and maybe even a man with money. And I wonder why he's there to get Jesus' attention. Is it because everybody steps out of the way because he's the most important? Or is it that he got there first? Or is it because he has the biggest problem because he has a little girl who's dying? Whatever it is, all these things are happening. And so he gets there and he says to Jesus, heal my daughter, she's dying. Jesus says, let's go. Jesus doesn't care if he has money or doesn't care if he's the leader or not the leader. He says, let's go. But on the way, this woman, a beggar, gets in the way while his daughter is dying. Now, I'm about as peaceful of a guy as they come. But if you can imagine some kind of story that I take my daughter to the ER, and they say, you know, she's sick, she's got to have this medicine right away, and the only place you can get it is at CVS. We're out. You've got to go down to CVS on the corner of Bryant. Okay, I'll go, and I'll go as fast as I can, and I run to the back to the pharmacist, and I say, I've got to have this medicine. An old bum walks in there with his coat, and he has his flask in one pocket, and then a flask in the other side. And he's hasn't shaved in days, and he's back there mumbling and causing problems with the pharmacist. And my daughter is dying in the car. I'm a peaceful guy, but I would probably knock his block off because my daughter is dying. In the midst of all this, Jesus stops and he pays attention to the beggar. And he heals her. He says, your faith has made you well. Well, then you remember, just to kind of narrate the story, the rest with Jairus, you remember that the men come to Jairus and they say, don't bother the teacher anymore, she's dead. And I don't know how fast all of that took place if it didn't all just enter Jairus' head because Jesus answers so quickly. I don't know what happens, but Jesus said, just believe. I can imagine Jesus keeping eye contact with him all the time. You believe in me, don't listen to those guys over there. And so you remember they go to the house and the girl has died and they've hired the professional mourners to be there already. They're all crying and Jesus said, this girl is not dead, but this girl is asleep. And he goes in and he says, Talitha Koum, you remember that? Little girl, get up. And the little girl is raised. And Jesus cares about the little girl as well. Now tell me, back with the bleeding woman, what could man do? Nothing. What could Jesus do? He could heal her. He could give her back her dignity as well as heal her. Well, who is this that even disease obeys? It's the Son of God. And if Jesus can do what no man can do, he must be the Son of God. There's good news here. Because Jesus can take care of us. Now you look at Jairus and his daughter. What can man do with a girl dying? Nothing. What could Jesus do? He could raise her up. And if Jesus can do what no man can do, then Jesus must be the Son of God. And if Jesus can raise up this little girl, when the day comes, he can raise me from the grave as well. Do you understand why these lessons are powerful? You start seeing the relevance of Christianity, the relevance of Jesus. And you start saying, I need that. We've kind of changed times, and you will run into people who are very religious, and you'll want to study, and you'll maybe study in a different way. Most of the people that I run into, they just don't think that Christianity is relevant. It may be good a couple of times a year to make sure that God doesn't strike us down, but it's not relevant to the 21st century. This helps us see it is relevant. Jesus is real, and Jesus cares. It's the whole purpose of all of this. Okay. So the study takes you then, you'll see, to Mark chapter 16, verses 1 through 6. And in Mark 16, we go all the way to the end of Mark. You've marked that at the end of that last passage of where to go. Then you get there, and I put a little star by it because my questions are on the next page. And this is the resurrection of Jesus. I'll tell them this. Yes.
Do you use a particular version?
Do I use a particular version? This is a 1984 NIV is what this is. But as long as it's one they understand, I just use what they have. So, the reason I have it, I'll tell you the reason I use the NIV in studies is because it is the most sold version of the Bible in America. So if people have a Bible, there's more of a chance they'll have an NIV than anything else. But if they say, well, I have the English Standard, I'll say, okay, let's use the English Standard. Or even if they say, I have a Catholic Bible, I'll say, let's use that, because all these passages are in the Catholic Bible. Okay, I'll tell them, Jesus, in this case, Jesus has died, been buried, and this is resurrection. Just so they kind of understand the context. And most people, whether they're Christian or whatever, Muslim, Buddhist, they understand this story or part of it. So in chapter 16, verse 1, when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they went on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side. They were alarmed. Don't be alarmed, he said. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He is risen. He's not here. This is the place they laid him. And so then it talks about going and telling his disciples that he's been raised. So here you have a very similar concept about resurrection. What could men do with a dead man in the grave? Not anything. But what could Jesus do? And what could God do here? He was raised. And if he was raised like no man other, he must be the Son of God, and he can help me even when I'm dead. I can be raised. You go back to Mark chapter 9. You're staying in the same book here for almost the whole time. In Mark chapter 9. We're going to start in verse 2 and go through verse 7. I'm speeding this up a little bit because I'm watching the clock. This is what they call the Transfiguration. And I'll tell people sometime I'll explain to you more about this. But we're going to see Moses and Elijah from the Old Testament, and they're alive up on this mountain. And Jesus is there. But what we're really focused on right now is I want you to hear what the voice from heaven says. I want you to hear that voice from heaven and what they tell us. So it says, starting in verse 2, after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up a high mountain where they were all alone. Then he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say. They were so frightened. Then a cloud appeared and enveloped them, and a voice came from the cloud. "This is my Son, whom I love. Listen to him." What does the voice say?
Listen to Jesus.
Yeah. "This is my Son, and listen to him." So if you believe Jesus is the Son of God, what does God want us to do? Listen to his Son. And so then he asks, are you willing to listen to Jesus? I'm sure there are people that say no. But I don't know why, but every time I've said this, people go, yeah. One reason they're ready to listen to Jesus, and you don't ask this as the first question, is they may not be sure they really think Jesus is credible yet. But by this point, as you run down this, they're going, yeah, I'm ready. I'll listen to him. At least listen to him for right now. Now we move to another book. But I say just go one book over, probably 12 or 15 pages over to Luke chapter 6. I find at least, and you all may not find this, but I find a lot of people, as soon as I say, if I said go from Mark to Luke chapter 6, they start to panic because they have no idea and they start flipping. So I say just 10 or 12 pages away, just to the right. You know this story, the wise and foolish builders. Verses 46 through 49. "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do what I say? I will show you what he is like who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice. He's like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. And when a flood came, the torrent struck, and the house could not shake it because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who has built a house on the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed, and its destruction was complete." So why would I listen to Jesus? Y'all have any good answers? Because I don't want my house to fall down. Right? So I build on a solid foundation. I can remember one of those times, back to Brazil again. Y'all have heard those stories from me, I've been around. But seeing a program in a hotel. We didn't have CNN in our house, but we were at a hotel and saw a program on a show that talked about the houses that were being destroyed by the flooding in Brazil. And it just happened on that same day that we were on a 10-hour bus trip, that we were going over the very river on the bridge where this had all happened. And I could see exactly why the houses had been destroyed by the flood. They were built on the bank, on the sand. And they were all gone. Well, what a surprise. Similar thing happening in Galveston since we moved to Houston in Hurricane Ike. One house was left on one of the islands after the hurricane because there was no seawall there. It's kind of scary. So why would I listen to Jesus? Because I want to have a solid foundation. I don't want my life to fall apart. And so then I say, turn one more book, about 10 pages, to John chapter 12. John 12, 47 through 50. I already have so many notes in John chapter 12 that it's hard for me to find the right notes to read here. In John 12, 47 through 50. As for the person who hears my words but does not keep them, I don't judge them. For I did not come to judge the world but to save it. Excuse me, I misread that. As the person who hears my words but does not keep them, I do not judge them. For I did not come to judge the world but to save it. There is a judge for the one who rejects me and does not accept my words. That very word which I spoke will condemn him at the last day. For I did not speak my own mind. For I did not speak of my own accord, but the Father who sent me commanded me what to say and how to say it. So tell me, why should I listen to Jesus?
He's the Son of God.
He's the Son. Oh, yeah, Monty's got it. He is the Son of God. Because His words will judge me. It's important to know what Jesus says because that's where it comes. So, I sometimes say, depending on the situation, so, is your wife going to judge you? She does. No, I mean in the end. Is she going to judge you? No. Your kid's going to judge you? No. Your parents going to judge you? No. Preacher going to judge you? No. Who's going to judge you? Jesus. Then it seems like it'd be really important to listen to Jesus. And so they say, yeah. And so then we go to the next one. You'll see that. It's just one book over. What do I have written there? Acts 3? Acts 3, 23 through 33. I'm sorry, just Acts 3, 23. That's all we're going to read. Since there isn't a 33, we're only going to read 23. And this is in the middle of a sermon that Peter's giving. And he says, anyone who does not listen to Jesus will be completely cut off from among the people. Why should I listen to Jesus? So that I won't be cut off. And you know what it means to be cut off? It means no more relationship. I need a relationship with Jesus. I need to know Christ. And so I listen to Him. And then you go over just one more book. We're almost to the end of this lesson, and then we're going to have lesson 2 here in just a little bit. Unless you want to take a break before it. Is that okay? Okay. In Romans 10, verse 17, some of you know this already. I can't get my pages to work here. Paul says a very famous thing here. Paul, consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word of Christ. So why should I listen? Because that's where faith comes from, right? Consequently, faith comes from hearing. So I want to hear the word of Christ, because that's where my faith is built. And so that's good news, because Jesus is the Son of God, and He has the ability to help me. If I find myself in a storm, one of life's storms, Jesus can help, and does help. If I find myself with all kinds of internal issues, Jesus is the answer. If I find myself with health issues, Jesus is the one I turn to. Whatever the issue is, Jesus is the one. So I want to listen to Jesus. There's one other passage that some of you saw and probably in the writing that takes you to 1 Corinthians. You can go there if you choose to. I usually don't. I can tell you all that later, but we have it. It's not any big deal. It's just, I don't think we have to go that far. So let's take a break. How many minutes? Okay, 8 minutes. I feel like I'm moving like a freight train right now, so maybe rolling like a tumbleweed, but